Sergeant Elena Kostov's gaze remained fixed on the bullet-riddled warehouse in the distance, the place where it had all started. A long investigation had finally led her there. A shootout, a criminal taken down, and one loose thread. Alex, the younger brother of the mastermind, Ivan Petrov. Alex was an unwelcome reminder of the chaos Ivan had caused, and Elena was prepared to make him pay for everything. The plan had seemed simple enough at the beginning. Her colleagues had apprehended Alex, who insisted on his innocence. A college student, his record spotless, Alex was only guilty by association, a brother to the man who had almost cost Elena her life. Ivan had died in that raid, leaving Elena with nothing but grief and unanswered questions. She believed Alex knew more than he let on, and she was ready to do whatever it took to find out the truth. The first time she interrogated him, Alex didn't act like a hardened criminal. He was calm, collected, his green eyes displaying a mixture of fear and defiance. He wore a sweatshirt too big for him, his shoulders hunched as though to hide his tall frame. Despite his soft-spoken nature, Elena wasn't ready to fall for the act. "I'm not like him, officer," Alex said in a low voice, almost a whisper. His words were a plea, but his eyes held hers with a surprising steadiness. "I never knew what Ivan was doing. I wanted no part in it." Elena's response was cold. "You can tell your sob story to the judge, Alex. I'm not interested." She had heard too many lies in her years as a cop, and another criminal's excuses did nothing to move her. She watched him intently, hoping to catch a flicker of guilt, something that would betray his real intentions. But weeks went by, and no such evidence appeared. Elena found herself reluctantly visiting him again and again, trying to break him. She had expected resistance, but not the way Alex's soft persistence started to wear her down. He was different from his brother, gentler, kinder. Instead of rage, there was sorrow, and instead of threats, there were quiet apologies for things he hadn't even done. One rainy evening, everything changed. Elena had decided to confront Alex one last time. She was tired, frustrated, and questioning the motivations behind her obsession. When she arrived at the detention center, she found him sitting at the edge of his bunk, staring at the floor. His face lit up when he saw her, an expression of genuine surprise and relief that made Elena's heart skip a beat. "You're here," he said, standing as though her presence mattered. Elena found herself without words for a moment. The coldness that usually protected her seemed to falter in the face of Alex's quiet gratitude. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. She had spent years honing her ability to stay detached, to never let emotions interfere with her work. But here, in this dreary room, something shifted. It was the way he looked at her, not with fear or hatred, but with hope. "What are you playing at, Alex?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head. "I'm not playing at anything, Elena. I want you to believe me. I'm not my brother. I never wanted any part of his world." It was the first time he had used her first name. She should have corrected him, reminded him of the boundaries between them, but she couldn't. Instead, she took a step closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied his face, trying to find the deception that must be there. But all she saw was a young man caught in a nightmare he hadn't chosen. A man who had lost a brother, even if that brother was a monster. Slowly, she sat down opposite him, the harsh metal chair screeching against the cold concrete floor. The sound echoed between them, but neither flinched. For the first time, Elena let her guard down. "Why didn't you leave?" she asked. "If you knew what he was, why didn't you get out?" Alex sighed, the weight of years of guilt clear in his expression. "He was my brother," he said simply. "I thought I could save him. I thought he could change." Elena understood those words more than she cared to admit. She had always believed in second chances, even as the harsh reality of her job had worn her idealism away. Looking at Alex, she saw a version of herself, someone who had tried to hold on to hope, even when the world around them made it impossible. Over the next few months, Elena found herself spending more and more time with Alex, well beyond the requirements of her investigation. She learned about his love for painting, the way he had always dreamed of leaving the city, moving somewhere quiet, far from the shadows of Ivan's influence. She found herself sharing her own stories, how she had joined the force to protect people like her younger self, a girl who had once been terrified of the violence in her neighborhood. Slowly, the lines between prisoner and captor began to blur. It wasn't just sympathy anymore. It was something deeper. They laughed together, talked for hours about things that had nothing to do with crime or punishment. And one day, as the sun filtered through the bars of the window, Elena reached across the table and took Alex's hand. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. "I believe you," she whispered, her eyes locking onto his. "I believe you, Alex." For the first time, she saw tears in his eyes. He squeezed her hand, his voice breaking. "Thank you." It wasn't easy after that. Elena knew what they had wasn't supposed to happen. Her colleagues would never understand. They would call it a betrayal. But Elena also knew that she couldn't walk away from Alex. Not now. Not after everything they had shared. In the end, love found its way through the cracks of revenge and anger. It wasn't about saving Alex from his brother's crimes, or about Elena finding closure for her past. It was about two people, lost and broken, finding solace in each other. And for Elena, that was enough. The winter chill had settled in, and the frost-covered streets of the city mirrored the stillness that had grown between Elena and Alex. The investigation had ended, and Alex had been released from custody due to lack of evidence linking him to any crimes. Elena, however, couldn't shake the sense of unfinished business, nor the quiet longing that had begun to bloom inside her. One evening, Elena found herself outside Alex's apartment building. She had tried to convince herself that this was purely professional, that she wanted to see how Alex was doing after everything. But as she stood at the threshold, her heart beating rapidly in her chest, she knew that wasn't the whole truth. It was late, and her breath came out in frosty clouds as she hesitated, wondering if she should even be there. Before she could decide, the door opened, and there he was. Alex stood in the doorway, his face lighting up with surprise and something else. "Hope. Elena!" His voice was soft, almost disbelieving. She looked at him, taking in his messy hair, the worn sweater, the gentle tiredness in his eyes. It wasn't just pity or curiosity that had brought her here. It was him, the person she had come to know beyond the investigation. "Hi, Alex," she said, her lips curling into a small smile. I just wanted to see how you were." Alex stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. "Please come in. It's freezing out there." The apartment was small but cozy, filled with mismatched furniture and scattered art supplies. Sketchbooks, paint tubes, and brushes. Elena noticed a half-finished painting on an easel in the corner. The warmth of the room contrasted sharply with the cold night, and as she stepped inside, she felt a sense of ease wash over her. "Can I get you something? Tea? Coffee?" Alex asked, moving toward the tiny kitchenette, his voice tinged with nervousness. "Tea would be nice," Elena replied, watching him as he moved. There was a gentleness to his actions, a carefulness, that spoke of someone used to being cautious, used to protecting himself from the world. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, steam rising from their cups. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but laden with unspoken words. Elena was the first to break it. "I shouldn't be here," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "I'm a police officer. I'm supposed to keep my distance." Alex looked at her, a sad smile playing on his lips. "And yet you're here." Elena nodded, her fingers wrapping tightly around her cup. "I couldn't stay away. I tried, but—" Alex reached across the table, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently rested it on top of hers. "I know," he said simply. "I feel the same." She looked at their hands, the warmth of his touch seeping into her skin, and she allowed herself to be vulnerable for the first time in a long while. "I don't know where this goes, Alex. I don't even know if it can go anywhere. But I want to try." His eyes softened, and he squeezed her hand gently. "We don't have to know, Elena. We can just take it one day at a time." For the first time in what felt like forever, Elena allowed herself to smile. A real smile, unguarded and full of hope. "One day at a time," she repeated. They sat like that for a while, hands intertwined, the silence between them no longer heavy but comforting. Outside, the wind howled, and the world continued on, indifferent to the two souls finding solace in each other. Here, in the warmth of Alex's apartment, amidst the scattered art supplies and the scent of tea, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. No badges, no criminal pasts, just two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, willing to see where this fragile connection would take them. And for Elena, in that moment, it was enough. Weeks had passed since that winter night, and a routine of sorts began to form between Elena and Alex. It wasn't planned or discussed. It simply happened. Elena would stop by after her late shifts, sometimes with groceries or takeout, and they would spend the evening together, talking, sharing stories, and, more often than not, just sitting in silence, enjoying each other's presence. On a particularly cold Friday night, Elena arrived at Alex's door, her cheeks flushed from the biting wind. She knocked softly, and within seconds, Alex opened the door, a smile breaking across his face. "You're getting faster at answering the door," Elena teased as she stepped inside, shaking off the chill from her coat. "Maybe I was waiting by the door," Alex responded, his voice laced with warmth. He led her into the apartment, which was aglow with the soft light of a few lamps, creating a cozy refuge from the harshness of the world outside. Elena handed him a small box. "I brought something for you." Alex raised an eyebrow and opened the box, revealing a set of paints, vivid reds, blues, and greens that gleamed under the warm light. He looked up at Elena, a flicker of surprise and gratitude passing through his eyes. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," Elena replied, her voice gentle. "I know how much you love painting, and I figured it might help, pass the time." Alex swallowed, his gaze softening. "Thank you, Elena. It means a lot." He gestured for her to sit down on the worn-out couch, and as she settled in, Alex sat beside her, the box of paints resting on the table in front of them. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the old building. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Alex asked suddenly, breaking the silence. His eyes were fixed on the paints, but Elena knew he wasn't talking about art. She hesitated. "I do," she admitted, her gaze falling to her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. "But it's hard to see a clear path. My job, my life, it's all so complicated." Alex turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "I understand. I've been thinking about it too. About what we are. About how we can fit into each other's lives." Elena looked up, meeting his eyes. "I'm scared, Alex. I'm scared of what people will say. Of what might happen if this gets out." He nodded, shifting closer to her. "I'm scared too. But I also know that this us feels right. And I don't want to lose that." She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. He was right. What they had, as fragile and uncertain as it was, felt more real than anything she had experienced in years. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, her thumb brushing across his knuckles. "I don't want to lose it either," she whispered. "But we need to be careful. I can't afford to make mistakes. Not in my line of work." Alex nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Then we'll take it slow. No pressure, no expectations. Just whatever this is, we let it be." Elena smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. She leaned back against the couch, pulling Alex with her until his head rested against her shoulder. He closed his eyes, his breath steadying as they sat together in the dim light. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the window panes, but inside, it was calm. The world beyond the apartment could judge them, misunderstand them. But here, in this little pocket of warmth and quiet, Elena felt safe. She felt hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. As the night wore on, they stayed like that, leaning into each other, sharing a silence that was full of unspoken promises. Elena knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The world wasn't kind to people like them, people trying to rewrite their stories against all odds. But she also knew that she was willing to fight for this, for Alex. And for now, that was enough. Spring had come to the city, and with it a sense of renewal. The snow had melted, revealing streets that were bustling once again with people and life. In Alex's small apartment, sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow over the room. Elena was there, leaning against the kitchen counter as she watched Alex carefully mix paints on a palette. He was focused, his brow furrowed slightly in concentration. The gentle strokes of his brush filled the quiet with a soft, rhythmic sound that was almost meditative. "Why did you choose this?" Elena asked suddenly, her eyes resting on the canvas where colors were slowly coming together to form a serene landscape. An open field with wildflowers under a clear sky. Alex looked up at her, smiling softly. "Because it's peaceful. It's what I dream about when I think of the future. A place far away from here. A place where we could both be free." Elena's heart clenched at his words. She moved closer, until she stood beside him, her eyes now fixed on the canvas. It was beautiful, full of hope, of a life unburdened by their pasts. A life that sometimes felt impossible. "You think we can ever have that?" she whispered, her voice almost lost in the quiet of the room. Alex set the brush down and turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "I think it's worth trying for," he said. "I don't know if we can ever truly leave everything behind, but I know that I want to try. With you." For a moment, Elena couldn't speak. She felt the weight of her fears, the fear of failure, of judgment, of the consequences that would come if anyone found out about them. But Alex's eyes held hers, and she saw nothing but sincerity there. The kind of sincerity she had so rarely seen in her life. Slowly, she reached up, cupping his face in her hands. "I want that too, Alex. I'm tired of being afraid. I want to fight for something good. For us." He smiled, a smile that reached his eyes and filled the room with warmth. "Then we will," he said simply, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her close. They stood like that, holding each other in the sunlight, as if they could keep the rest of the world at bay. And for a moment they did. In that tiny apartment, amidst the cluttered art supplies and the soft glow of a new season, they allowed themselves to believe in a future that was different. A future where they could be together, without secrets or fear. Elena rested her head against Alex's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Where would we go?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Anywhere," Alex replied. "Somewhere quiet, where no one knows us. We could start over. I could paint and you could—" He hesitated, then smiled. "What would you do, Elena?" She closed her eyes, imagining it, the life he described. A life away from the demands of her badge, from the responsibilities that had weighed her down for so long. "Maybe I'd teach," she said softly. "Teach others how to protect themselves, how to be strong. Or maybe I'd just learn how to live a quiet life. I've never had that." Alex kissed the top of her head. "We'll find it together." It wasn't a promise of perfection. They both knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, of doubts and the lingering shadows of their pasts. But they also knew that they weren't alone anymore. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The sun continued to rise, filling the room with warmth and light, and as they held each other, Elena allowed herself to hope. She knew they couldn't erase everything that had happened, but they could build something new. They could choose love over fear, hope over despair. And that was enough.